Here, thank you. All right, so good morning. Welcome to Elevate Review Panel, Individual and Creative Business Panel 3, Day 2. Today, let me do just a quick update for all the folks who are attending this for the very first time. This panel is primarily comprised of applicants who are listed themselves as either state of Texas nonprofits or not a legally formed group for the most part. Panelists have reviewed all applications prior to today. They've provided comments and tentative scores. They do have the opportunity to change their scores today during the deliberation and will be finalized later today, or will be finalizing their scores later today. Each application has 10 minutes per application to be reviewed, and I'll be maintaining the stopwatch for that. We will stop recording the webinar and stop the timer if there are any tech issues that arise. For the most part, panelists aren't required to repeat comments, especially of things that they've already said. The panelists are not scoring on a consensus, so if one panelist feels one way about an application, it's totally fine for another panelist to feel differently. The panelists will not be announcing the numeric score that they gave to an application. However, they may indicate if that they felt the application scored really well or had some didn't score as well. They're going to be providing overall comments, 2 or 3 things that they really enjoyed about the application, and then 2 or 3 things that the applicant should consider for future improvement. Panelists are not considering information in scoring outside of the scoring rubric criteria. Something like financial need is not a consideration and is not a component that is scored, for example. We are also asking panelists to look beyond grantsmanship. So if the information lies somewhere within the application and the materials provided, they can count that towards their panel review. However, they are encouraged to let the panel applicant know that the information was difficult to find. Panelists are also allowed to use firsthand experience and are also allowed to look at the website of the applicant. If a panelist has a conflict of interest, they will be turning off their camera and silencing their microphone, and we will invite them back once we're ready to start reviewing the application following the application that they are recusing themselves from. So that's a quick update. Another note I wanted to make is that we do have primary and secondary panelists assigned. The primary and secondary does not mean that their scores have greater weight in any way or that they are the only ones who reviewed your application. It's just a way for us to ensure that there's one person who is available to introduce the application and another person who is going to be providing secondary comments. All right, with that said, let's go ahead and begin. I also want to note, Harold, we did some updates to the primary and secondary list, and just so you're prepared for later today when we review Efrik Genze, you'll be the secondary. So just a heads up on that because that's in a couple of applications. The first application up for review is Film Kids. Jake is the primary, Siri is the secondary. Let me get my timer prepared here. All right, Jake, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Thank you. So, Film Kids is proposing to add 3 underserved schools to the series of programs that they are creating. They are instructing school-age children in film production, writing, and other filmmaking techniques, and ultimately creating a series of showcases for the students that attend these 3 elementary schools to showcase their films. The funding that they are seeking is for instructor hours, supplies, and creating these educational programs. I found this to be a rather impressive application. I do think it is fairly obvious the opportunities that it is creating by specifically targeting younger students to be able to teach these skills to. I do think it has a pretty exemplary track record of connecting to existing educational institutions within the Austin community. And I think that the programmatic reach is highly specific. That is really the central thing to communicate. It really is for these youth and for the audience that would be going or connected to these youth film showcases. At the same time, those opportunities could ultimately last a lifetime, so it really is generating a longer term opportunity. So I do think that it seems responsible and appropriate, the funding that they are requesting.
Yeah, I also scored this application in the high range. I think it's a great opportunity for kids to have this available to them and their families involved in that. I think one sort of criteria that I was wanting to know more was the cultural leadership, just because it's not clear if the leadership has lived experience with the key constituencies. They mentioned families as part of the creative process, but then I have it wasn't clear to me about the leadership and how is their connection with the community they're serving. But overall, I think it's a great application.
Thank you. Any additional comments on this application? Melinda?
I wanted to second Siri's sentiment. I love the application as a whole. I love the focus on the kids, that it's a youth based program, but I wasn't clear on the demographics that the schools mentioned. I wasn't clear about that. And so I wasn't sure exactly who the key constituents were. Like I need a little bit more specifics of that. And again, the cultural leadership in relation to that.
Thank you. Anything else? If not, Anne-Marie.
Okay. Up next is Upasana Kakuru. Harold is the primary and Jake is the secondary. Harold, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Okay. Thank you for allowing me to hear that pronunciation. Upasana Kakuru, I think, is requesting $25,000 for Varta, Cultural and Literary Festival of Diversity and Expression. And what that project is a two-day literary festival that celebrates literature, art, culture, storytelling, and folkways from the South Asian diaspora. Provides a space for conversations, unique opportunities through author meets, panels, book features. I scored this application well, partially because I was happy to see that someone was doing programming that's kind of outside the norm of the proposals that we've been seeing, doing something with literature for a targeted demographic for a cultural community, and making the link with literacy and storytelling and engaging kids and young adults in the programming. The founder, the person behind this, is an experienced writer and blogger, mentions in fairly specific detail how her career and her interest in writing has brought her to want to do this and engage with children, so that children and families living here in Austin would have opportunities to make connection to traditions that come from South Asia. Community voice, cultural leadership, I thought was impressive in that it seems to be a well laid out plan for pulling community together and involving community. At some level, it seems aspirational, yes. Because I get the impression that this is a new program. But for me, it was a well-written proposal, and it's fairly clear, and the targeted outreach that is planned for the program to set up this festival. And hopefully some young writers will emerge from it as well.
Thank you. If I am indeed coming through, I echo almost all of those sentiments, though there were some questions that I was left with after reviewing this application. I believe it fits in with the mission of the grant quite well, but I was left with some questions about the track record of execution of this particular event in the past. I think it demonstrates a fairly modest history of service and cultural leadership, but I do wonder who this is ultimately serving. I am curious about the opportunities that are created for the participants versus the audience, or the artists versus the audience, and how are those ultimately selected. It seems that language accessibility is something that within the application, something they're very aware of, but it does not seem to be listed as a priority. Perhaps that is due to the nature of the focus of the literary festival, but that is something that I think should be given attention to in Austin, as to what in the Austin community is being served language-wise by this program. And finally, the budgetary sufficiency, I was curious for a further breakdown as to what the funding actually would be going towards in a day-to-day programming in the festival.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments on this application?
I just wanted to concur some with Jake. Part of what I said is the aspirational nature. The applicant seems qualified to pull this programming together, but previous experiences has been more of a writer than an organizer.
Thank you. Did I hear someone else, Siri?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that I also have questions around the budget. And some of the amounts seem too large, and some others there wasn't consistency in the budget. So I just wanted to point that out for future application for the participant.
Thank you. Any additional comments? All right, Anne Marie.
All right, next is Africanse. Siri is the primary and Harold is the secondary. Let me reset my timer. And Siri, whenever you are ready to begin.
Yes, so this is for a West African Dance Conference. The applicant says that they would like to make the African culture become stronger for education and bringing joy and healing to all people. For the conference, they want to bring 7 teachers of drum and dance from West Africa to teach in the conference. They will also need to ship in instruments for teachers and students. The conference will consist of all-level dance and drum classes. There will also be merchant booths and food vendors related to the culture. There will be performances complete with African customs at the ending of the conference. So this is one of the applications that I wanted to hear more from you all, from the panel, because I do think that it's adding to the culture, obviously in Austin, that it's a relevant project, but overall, especially looking at the documentation, I wasn't sure who was benefiting from this, or more than that the project seems to be serving everyone, that the general public, and especially when I went through the videos and all of that, it's just not sure if there is a specific community at risk that is being served, or if it is more of like a generalized audience. So I wanted to hear more from others if they had a similar impression on that.
And tell me one more time, I'm the secondary, right? That's what we had put on the run of show.
Harold is the secondary.
I was just looking at that and when you spoke up, Jay. I share similar concerns that Siri has. I'm familiar with Jean-Claude's work. He's an excellent dancer and he is an excellent teacher. He has a history in Austin of turning a lot of people onto West African dance, but those people mostly come through his classes that he offers. And I don't know if it's, you know, the issue of grantsmanship or what, but I scored this medium high, I guess is one way to say it, because I have some understanding of his work and his track record doing the work, but I would have liked to have seen more detail on execution and actually pulling something together above and beyond what he's done so far in terms of pulling together a conference and bringing folks in. The budgetary questions that I had is that he also listed purchase of equipment, and I don't think that is allowed in this program. And I guess I'm asking for clarification on that.
Yeah, so purchasing, so again, this funding is specifically for programmatic funds. So the funds have to be used up in the service of producing that event, and anything that is remaining, if there was anything that would essentially exist and be useful beyond the contracted activity, that would not be an eligible expense. We consider that kind of like a capital expense. So the purchase of instruments would not be an eligible expense. However, it doesn't make the application ineligible. It would just be something at the time of contracting where we would revise the applicant's budget and ensure that they understand that those funds cannot be used to purchase that. However, they could use other funds from other sources to purchase the instruments that they need, or if they needed to use city funds, they could rent that equipment and use that for the showcase or for the festival.
Harold, I wanted to add, but I'm still the primary. Sorry, Patricia. Then I messed with your head. Just looking at my notes, I think the proposal would benefit also for having intersectionality within the consideration of the whole proposal, and also accessibility. Those were places where they lost some points on my end because there is no accessibility via language or any other, and then the considerations on intersectionality.
Agreed.
Right, thank you all. Any additional questions or clarifications?
I just wanted to say overall, my comments also were regarding like not enough. I couldn't gather the information I needed to gather from the responses. And then yes, definitely accessibility was an issue.
All right, thank you so much. Anne Marie.
Okay. The next application up for review is Future Traditions Fest. Melinda is the primary. Oops, let me get to my timer correctly. There we go. And Harold is the secondary. Melinda, whenever you're ready to begin.
All right, Future Traditions Fest curates and presents experimental performances and transmedia works led by Latinx artists, and they're proposing a 3-day festival in which there will be a guest artist talk day 1, experimental video showcase also part of that day, new performances by collaborating artists day 2, and also roundtable discussion, and it closes with a guest artist workshop on day 3. The project overall seems very well organized and thought out already based on the responses. It's clear, you know, what they have lined up, doable within the budget. I also noted the leadership was impressive in terms of the diversity it captures. We have one of the leaders is from a musician from the Rio Grande Valley and has lived experience on both sides of the border. We have another person who's born in New Jersey and Cuban Dominican Republic and ancestry, and then Austin native that is a Mexican American composer and guitarist. So I was very impressed by the leadership, the sort of diversity in the leadership, and the history of service was solid with a track record of interesting collaborations already that include different types of Latinx music. So the kind of the range is not just Mexican American or not just Cuban, right, but a wide range that seems to come together, and at least in the way it was described, in a very interesting fusion of music. So their goals are to create a space for presentation of experimental art forms for the Latinx voice through music. So all of that were all pluses. And I think the only place where I was left with a little bit, I wanted a little bit more, was the community voice. It seems to be part of the presentations when the festival's going on. There's going to be interaction, but there wasn't any indication that I could see of the community voice sort of being part of the planning process or being part from the beginning in some way to indicate their needs and desires.
And I was the secondary on this. I scored this application well. I concur with what Melinda just said. I think that what I appreciated a lot about the application was that their responses directly address the specifics and the tone of the questions, and they communicated the information that I think that we're looking for in the application clearly. It was well written, and the project it's not a project that there are a lot of similar projects in Austin. I think that there's a market for that here.
Thank you. Any additional comments or questions? If not, Anne Marie.
Okay, next application is Cut and Deliver. Harold is the primary and Melinda is the secondary. Harold, whenever you're ready. And when I'm ready, hold on one second. All right, now I'm ready. You may begin.
The Cut and Deliver project is requesting $75,000 to do the specific project called Circle of Fifths, in which artists submit pitches to Cut and Deliver, sharing their creative ventures with the campaign circulated online. We had a panel of 4 and community vote, selecting 20 of those creatives to be part of the presentation at the event. It's very detailed. 5 of those are chosen to get incentives to continue in the process. There's a presentation with 5 participants presenting project pitches about the project in progress, and then they would have multiple evaluation rounds, and then the finalists would be announced based on merit. When I read just the top level summary, I was a bit confused about what the program was really going to be all about. And then it became clear to me that it's a collective to bring largely women of color and the queer community together in terms of filmmaking. And the folks that are behind this, some of the people that I know are behind it, are very experienced in the film community. And what they are essentially trying to do is to provide a service organization that will help be a conduit for getting BIPOC women filmmakers' work produced and out into the public. And as part of their kind of onboarding for these folks, they are essentially a full service production company. So they're trying to, I think, share their success in the film community and birth other BIPOC women filmmakers to get their projects out and into the marketplace. Again, this is one of the projects that I appreciated. I didn't score them the highest, but I scored them well because it is unique among the proposals that we've seen and addresses a really specific constituency, but in a discipline that we don't see many proposals that come through. So I thought it was well done.
Thank you, Harold. Yes, I agree about the need that it's addressing. I thought it was a great proposal for that reason. I love the explanation of the cultural leadership and their relation to the projects, their lived experience. They saw a need that they experienced themselves, and they also have a great section on the history of service, the track record there. And then I think, so yeah, I scored this one pretty high. The only place I wanted a little bit more, just because it was already there that they employ marginalized, people from the marginalized communities, that they already have a record of employing them. So I want to see a little bit more about how many work on a project, or just a little bit more details, because I think that would definitely make this stronger. And then the budget, just that little bit more of a narrative for the proposed budget. That's it.
Thank you so much. Any additional comments on this application?
I will mention also that given the media, the medium that these folks work in, I would have liked to have seen more information about their marketing reach going outside of the city. I mean, given that they are film and digital media, it would seem that they would have focused some on that and doing something that would get tourism to come into the city as well, and not have it just be accessible, online.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? All right, and Jake, were you about to say something?
No, I was preparing for the next.
Oh, okay. And Marie.
All right, up next is Indresa Warehouse. Jake is the primary, Melinda is the secondary. And if you give me 1 second to reset the timer. Jake, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Thank you. So Indresa Warehouse is a multi-purpose space, and from the application, designed to be open 24 hours a day, I believe, is what I'm reading, 7 days a week. So it really is an open house type of space. There is a tremendous amount of programming written here without necessarily a timeline as to what that program is going to be. So I think jam session is a word that is used in quotations here. I think that might be a decent way to describe it, is, kind of really emphasizing using these funds to create a certain kind of space with a ton of programming. And that programming might be anything, and not only anything, but kind of open to many different types of programming from many different kinds of artists. I would have to be honest and say I found this application to be somewhat chaotic. It did not seem to be immediately focused, while many of the things that we are trained to be looking for are referenced. It did not seem that they were particularly focused. And it seemed to me that there was a little bit of everything, a little bit of language accessibility, a little bit of accessibility to disability, which seems to be good, but it seems like it was a small thing to cover what was required, but it didn't necessarily convert to the programming ambitions, particularly for what they were asking for. In addition to this, they specify that the majority of their funding, if you'll just pardon me for one moment, I'm locating the place. Yes. So they're saying that the majority of funding is going to essentially organizational, paying the salaries of the people that work there, which would not disqualify them. But there's not necessarily an immediate distinction between what is a guest programmer, what is an extant programmer, and what is just repairs to the actual space which is going to house this program. So that is my essential review, is that I did not feel that this was focused enough for me to confidently say that it is meeting the requirements of the grant, though it does reference those in the application.
Hi, I largely agree with Jake's evaluation of this application. I think the sentiments and values that are behind the work proposed are certainly, aligned with our mission. However, there isn't enough evidence to show that those will be executed carefully. There are, there's too much going on. There's not a focus on a couple of specific things that are going to happen. There isn't a timeline for when they're going to happen, who's part of those particular different events. And the key constituencies were like all different types of marginalized communities, but they did, there was never a sort of specific way in which it was described how the service was going to help them or include them.
Thank you. Any additional comments on this applicant?
Oh, sorry. No, you go.
Okay. Go.
I'll keep it very brief and just say it does seem that they've demonstrated a sufficient record in the past. They've been around for a while and have, done successful programming to last this long. I would just say it really needs to be evident in the application for me to feel confident about that.
Sari?
Yeah, I just wanted to align with what people have said, mentioned that the documentation that I saw didn't provide information that they were reaching underserved communities as something central to the mission, although it was mentioned, and they mentioned people with disabilities, specifically PTSD, but like I couldn't see that in the application as such. And something that I do want to mention, and this is feedback for future applications for this person, is there is in the board, there's people of color are mentioned, but when they mention by name a woman of color, in contrast to that, they do not mention someone that is African American, and they just put the African American mathematician without a name. I think this is really something, yeah, it's just like disturbing a little bit for me. And I was they mentioned LGBT community and the veteran community, but they are not mentioned as part of the people who hold power at the organization. And so I think what we have been saying is that there's mention of some communities, but we're not sure that they are actually part of. And I think that I wanted to point that out.
Okay. Yes, Harold?
And I concur with everything that has been said so far. And for me, this application, it read like meeting the tenets of the Elevate grant program propelled them to write the application to do this kind of equity work, but it doesn't appear to be part of who they are and what they do already. And that, for me, that's problematic. To decide to do equity work just because there is a funding program out there, rather than there being a funding program out there that helps you continue and get better at your equity and representation and inclusion work. That's.
Thank you. Any additional comments? All right, Anne Marie.
Okay. Up next is AACP, or Austin Asian Community Partnership. Harold is the primary and Jake is the secondary. Harold, let me reset this. Okay, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay. The AACP is requesting $25,000 to go toward their 2024 Dragon Boat Festival and Race. It's an annual program that celebrates the diverse cultural heritage and community spirit of the Asian American community in Austin. It is a tradition. It's a long-running festival that started in 1999 and has continued forward. This organization also does a season of 3 annual events. They do a Lunar New Year event, the Dragon Boat Festival, and the Harvest Moon Festival in the fall. The person whose name is on the application, I am familiar with her and her work over years. She's has been active in this cultural community and with the Asian American Cultural Center. The organization has, I would say the organization has strong ties to the Asian American community, and they are seeking funding for this program. But this is not the only thing they do. Their community voice and cultural leadership is sound. I am not personally aware so much of the boat race, but the documentation backs up that this is an annual thing that they've been doing and attracted people from Austin and surrounding areas in Central Texas, at least, for a long time. And they make a point of saying that their reach goes from Taylor to Killeen to Houston and Dallas, and I quote, and even Arizona. So they brought folks in from outside to participate, but that also means that they brought people into the city of Austin, because this is something that is unique, and there's an audience for it. I scored the application. I scored the application highly. Thought it was a good application, focuses on making sure that artists get paid, rentals, contract professional services, and such. And it seems to make sense. And so I scored it highly.
I agree. I also scored it highly. I think that in the cultural leadership category, this is definitely exemplary. It also is something that is participatory and open to various groups and creating opportunities for visibility, literally by being, participants on these teams in the boat race, but also creating great opportunities for an audience to engage with cultural traditions in a new way. And also in a part of Austin that is pretty central. So it's kind of opening up cultural specificity to something to a much broader audience, which I think is fairly impressive. It does seem like the use of funds is responsible that they're proposing. And I scored it quite highly. I thought it was really well organized.
Thank you. Any additional comments on this application? All right. If not, Anne Marie.
Okay, next application is DBA Austin Troubadours. Jake is the primary and Siri is the secondary. Let me reset the timer. All right, and Jake, whenever you're ready to begin.
Thank you. I'm just bringing my notes up. Okay, so the DBA Austin Troubadours are a classical music ensemble that performs work from far older centuries, maybe like 300 years ago. They are effectively seeking to create a series of programs to be performed in varying Austin venues, some of which are going to be for free. But these differing programs are oftentimes in collaboration with another group. Sometimes that will be a dance company, that will be a theater company, or that will be a venue that they are producing new work at. This is now to go to my commentary. This is something that I found rather interesting and sort of difficult to create a summary judgment on, particularly in the category of cultural leadership. I do know from talking in previous sessions and also knowing the grant requirements, the art form is not to be considered. It's really the strength of the application. That being said, I do not necessarily know if a traditional medium in this context fulfills the requirements of the grant. I do think there is a cultural specificity. Certainly no other group that I've reviewed the application of is proposing this kind of work, especially this kind of work to be exhibited and given away with as much accessibility. So major points for that. At the same time, I don't know if this and I genuinely mean that when I say I don't know if this actually is representative of cultural tradition that is appropriate for this grant process. And what I say when I mean that is not the cultural tradition, but the way that it is ultimately presented. It's a rather small ensemble that is giving away limited performances. And so I don't know if that is representative of the needs of the community that they are indeed taking these performances to. Other than that, though, I will say from their track record, it does seem that they demonstrate responsibility, and there also does seem to be positive demand for the kind of work that they are producing, as is demonstrated by their many different partnerships.
Yes, I scored this application in the lower end just because it seems to be presented for anyone that wants to go, for all audiences, but I don't see that their mission is rooted in serving communities that are at risk of cultural erasure or displacement within Austin, or that have been institutionally marginalized. I see that like they seek to serve broadly all communities, as I read the application. That's my interpretation. I also was wondering of how the relationship were with their key constituencies, if they have, but they don't seem to have a creative input on the process or anything. The community doesn't have a voice necessarily in their work. So they include the community later in the process, and I don't see that equity is part of the proposal really. So that's why, yeah, I did score it in the low end.
Yes, Harold?
Yeah, and I think that this proposal is an example of the comment that I made earlier. This seems to be an opportunity to bring programming to, quote, underserved communities and East Austin. But it's not something that this organization has a track record of doing. but there's funding available, so maybe let's do it now because there's this funding, but the funding ultimately is still distributed to a very, very small group of folks who themselves and the institutions at which they work and represent probably don't score very well on being viewed through an equity lens. So that was problematic to me for this application.
Additional comments, thoughts? Okay, there aren't any. Anne Marie.
Okay. The next application up for review is Grapes of Wrath 75 project. Harold has a conflict, so he will be recusing himself by turning off his camera and muting. Jake will be the primary and Melinda will be the secondary. Jake, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Thank you. So, this is also to say, both for clarification, but also kind of how I graded it. This is referred to as the Grapes of Wrath 75 project, though the program being described is the Orwell 1984 plus 40 project. So the idea that they are proposing is to create a multimedia work around the novel by George Orwell, 1984. The idea is specifically targeted towards Austin tourists and would be performed outdoors as a public concert, so to speak. That would be the medium of expression in the Austin African American Cultural Heritage District. In addition to the live programming, there's also a proposal for a 4-episode streaming series to promote future tourism to Austin. So in order to do this, I did find this application to be lacking. I know I keep starting with cultural leadership, but that is usually just how I take my notes first. So in the cultural leadership section, it does seem like each of these artists on this team certainly have a track record, but I have a very difficult time understanding how this connects beyond its location to the actual neighborhood it's going to be performed in. The medium of expression seems to be very explicitly for tourists. Those are people that would supposedly not be Austin residents. And so is the benefit and inclusion in the community meant to be partnerships with the performers from that community? And if so, why is that being done specifically for tourism? It's also important to note that 1984 is an English novel that was, written not necessarily about Austin. So I'm not immediately clear as to why a performance of this particular piece in this particular community for people not residents of Austin actually fulfills the mandates of the grant. Though I do know that, of course, that's a classic high school novel. And so in creating a piece of discussion around this, potentially where youth can see it, may also be useful, helpful, and open things up to an important discussion within that community. In summation, I do think it is a very interesting program, but I did not immediately see how this connects to the grant mandates in its accessibility.
All right. So yes, I agree in terms of not being clear about how the project serves a particular community in Austin. So that was my main. How has your project arrived at? So one of my main comments was, how has your project arrived at all the achievements mentioned in regards to direct service to the key constituencies? And so that was missing for me. Yeah. So I think most of the comments that Jake had was basically how I felt about this application.
Any additional comments, thoughts on this application?
And I was just going to provide a bit of a point of clarification in terms of the applicant's focus on tourism. I think that something I want to point out is that the funds come from the hotel occupancy tax, and the funds are essentially provided by tourists. So it is possible when applicants are submitting their applications, we do mention that there is a part of the eligibility is ensuring that they have a program that is accessible to tourists and advertised to them as part of the eligibility components, but it isn't necessarily a requirement that tourists attend an event, but they just have to be shown to be marketed to tourists. So I just wanted to provide that bit of clarity.
Thank you. Any additional comments, questions? If not, Anne-Marie.
Okay, we are going to take our 15-minute break. Let's be back at 11:07. All right, welcome back to the Elevate Review Panel for Individual and Creative Businesses Panel 3, Day 2. Let's get started with our next group of applications. UBK Universe LLC is up next. Siri will be the primary and Melinda is the secondary. Siri, whenever you are ready, you may begin.
Yes. So the project name is Heart Evolution. They are asking $25,000 for a 3-year-long weekly art fest school program at the Del Valle Middle School for the academic year of 2023-2024. The applicant will curate an exhibition of students' works at Austin Central Library's Kids Block Party, where they will host a full-day drop-in public art workshop for as many as 6,000 library visitors, as they say here. I think this is a great opportunity for kids to relate to the arts, and also a good option for families to have after school and like help, students to do something with their time if their parents are not necessarily able to be with them. And in general, I scored this well. I think it has a clear key constituency groups that are part of the program. The creative literature has a rooted cultural understanding and lived experience with them. The project definitely centers stories and experiences of the community, in this case, the kids. And I think there is not much else. I'm looking at my notes. Maybe a point on accessibility, because they don't provide something beyond the ADA. So then there lose some points in there. And I also would like to have more clarity on the budget, more detail. So those were my comments.
Okay. Sorry, my notes up for this one are on the screen. Okay. Sorry, give me 1 second. So yes, I wrote for key constituencies, given that the program will serve Del Valle Middle School, which has a majority Hispanic student population. I assume that this was the key constituency. I don't think it was said specifically in that portion, but I could gather that information from other information in the application. And then the history of service was strong for me. And the one place where I had a question was in marketing. It did not seem to have a clear, detailed plan for marketing. And I also had a question regarding how constituents are involved in the shaping of this program.
Thank you. Any additional comments on this applicant?
Yeah, just to what you said, Melinda, I also have a note on that, how the the key constituencies are have a voice in the project. And I think this happens a lot with when we are serving youth, that is like kind of like offering something, but they don't have much say on. And so I also added that in my comments of how much they can actually say what they want to do, right? And that's important too.
Great, thank you. If nothing else, Anne Marie.
All right. The next application is Artistic Education Company. Melinda is the primary and Jake is the secondary. Melinda, let me reset my timer real quickly. All right, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Okay. Austin Glitz and Glam Concerts is a concert series held at the Music Hill Ranch property, bringing together local musicians, singers, actors, and dancers for a multidisciplinary concert series to include the applicant's new album release concert, Monique Dashe Timeless Christmas Classics, held at the Music Hill Ranch property. The concert series supports artist education companies, educational, performing, and musical arts program agenda, working with youth in the Great Austin, Texas region. So here the mission of this project is to promote the arts and engagement with the arts to a young audience. So I thought that was a plus, working with a youth audience. I was a little unclear about the programming that the budget is for. And my other comments were, there was a lot about what has been done before and how the applicant is herself and it has life experience in terms of the cultural connection to the key constituents. But there is not an explanation, and about her like own identities as intersectional, but then there's not an explanation on how that informs her programming and or leadership of the organization or the programs that she's putting together. So this was medium for me. Medium.
Coming in as second, I completely agree. I found that when it came to mentioning the mandates of the program for accessibility or certain themes that needed to be considered in an audience, a lot of the questions were answered solely for the artist, leaving many questions about accessibility for the actual program. I did wonder if this is, though of course it is, the holidays are a tradition, I do wonder if this is effective through the equity lens or for going to underserved communities with programming that meets them where they are. And then finally, I did not necessarily see a particular history of resilience through the pandemic. Of course, everyone was treated differently, but in looking at the history of production work, that was definitely something that I had some lingering questions about.
Thank you. Any additional comments or questions on this application? If not, Anne Marie.
Okay, the next application is Cirque Vita. Jake is the primary and Siri is the secondary. Jake, whenever you are ready, you may begin.
Thank you. Okay, so Cirque Vita is proposing a program, a show, fairly squarely within the realm of the circus arts, to create a performance that I believe is narrative-based, and specifically hoping to open up the world of circus arts, which have, according to this application, traditionally been closed off to people within the community supposedly that they're representing, which they cite as BIPOC individuals. There are a lot of community connections mentioned, but all to be filtered through ultimately this program, which is a singular show. so that is the description of the program. And to bring up my notes on this. There we go. I did not find that this particular program to align with the grant objectives. I also, in my knowledge as a folklorist, definitely take some umbrage with some of the historical claims they're making about the connection of the various communities feeding into this particular art form, and particularly inclusion and exclusion. I know that to take the advice from yesterday, maybe come back to me in saying what that is. But I do think that the history demonstrated does not necessarily match the claims being made in this application. As a result, to filter things through that equity lens, it would have to be solely from the word of this application. And I did not find that to be ultimately convincing that it actually meets the mandates of this grant with the program being presented. I do want to say, though, it does seem like there is demand. So all these things about meeting the community where they are, I do think there is an opportunity in this program to achieve that. And I wish that there was a greater specificity for how that would be achieved for the audience, not just the performers in this application.
Yes, I'm not a folklorist, so I don't know the history of the circus, but so I was like, oh, interesting that like this form seems to be somehow inclusive, but of course with the references I have, I can see also a history of objectualizing or of like even ableist history of the circus. So I think I have both references, but I thought it was interesting that they were using this form just because it's not so common and it has some potential, I guess. So I actually scored this proposal in the middle high, just because of I've seen this potential that it has, and seems to be serving groups that could use the platform to express some of their experiences. I think I'm trying to see where they probably in language accessibility they lost some points, and more details also in the components of the budget. But I'm in the middle, so if there's anyone else that wants to like chime in about it, yeah, I will appreciate that.
Any additional comments, thoughts?
Yeah, I think I was also impressed by the uniqueness of the proposal, but I definitely have some things to think about now. I think that my only room for improvement note that I had made was regarding there was opportunities for creation. There was mention, I believe, of artists being paid, and again here I just would like that seems to be a really strong, component. So always useful to have a little bit of an idea of how many artists. That was my only comment on this one, but I will be thinking about some of the things Jake said.
Okay, thank you. Harold?
I scored this application well, medium well, I guess, too. And the issues that I had to I made note of is that I wanted to see more about collaborators and collaboration within the organization, and some idea, more specific idea of what that team is or would be. I felt it was lacking in information on outreach for tourism, and the intersectionality component I didn't feel was clearly addressed here.
Thank you.
Overall, I think it's a positive program overall. Again, like Siri said, because it's not something that we usually see in the funding program here. And maybe there's room for development for this organization and other organizations like it.
Thank you. If there's not anything else, Anne Marie.
Okay, next is Fat Bottom Cabaret. Siri is the primary and Jake is the secondary. Let me reset the timer. And Siri, whenever you're ready to begin.
I apologize, my dog, it seems to want to play, so like if you hear like a squeaky sound, it's her. Sorry. Okay, so Fat Bottom Cabaret is a BIPOC queer plus size performance troupe that produces an Austin-based variety show every quarter. The show serves as an opportunity for POC visibility and representation through art, music, and performance. They employ 20 permanent people and 5 guests each show, ranging from drag, burlesque, comedians, dancers, singers, musicians, and sound and stage production. Their goal is to provide entertainment not often seen in the city, with bodies not often represented. I think that what stuck out to me the most was this sort of take on the cabaret that brings in bodies that are not often represented indeed. I think that, you know, cabaret has this sensuality to it that at a point has been built as requiring certain type of body that is like hegemonic or whatever. And I really appreciate that they're bringing this plus size approach. I think it's very current. It's important as a part of our culture of like, what is it, a body that's supposed to be perfect, quote unquote. And I scored them well. I think it's a great opportunity. I could see how the intersectionality is at the front, how much the group in itself has created a culture to do together, so it doesn't feel like it's just one person driving, but like a collective. And so in general, I have them score well. The only or one of the things I would say though is that they don't have any language accessibility, so that could be a point for improvement. But overall, I think it's a good proposal. Mm-hmm.
I scored this very highly. I see in the application a real opportunity that they are conscious of to kind of hit everything the grant is about. Develop a local community of artists that also perform for a local audience, that also draws tourism, and draws tourism to something that is distinctly Austin insofar as highlighting this tradition and this group of performers. Not only that, but though it is a brief record, which has been something that in other instances I might have scored lower for, they provide a tremendous amount of detail in the short amount of time that they have been putting works together. For the constituents, so I think that this is something that is also, to an extent, potentially quite narrow. I think that this kind of performance is really for who it's for, right? If you're not a fan, you might not necessarily stumble into a performance like this. At the same time, they also seem to be balancing and growing and broadening what that audience is. So I think that it is quite niche. At the same time, that niche is demonstrating growth in the programming that they're creating, which I think is quite impressive. And finally, yes, my only other thing is kind of back to that other set of scales that we mention in a few things, right? Is this necessarily for an audience outside of the existing really devoted fan base? This I do not know, so I don't know if it is necessarily broad, but in creating a portfolio of communities that are represented by numerous programs, this definitely represents its community quite well. There's a lot of cultural leadership.
Thank you. Any additional comments on this applicant? Okay, if not, Anne Marie.
All right. Next is Austin Dance India. Harold is the primary and Melinda is the secondary. Harold, whenever you're ready to begin.
Austin Dance India is requesting $25,000. The project name is Beyond the Binary, Queer Stories from Hindu Mythology. They propose to do 4 performances of Breaking the Binary, same name, presented at the Doherty with community partners Algo and the Asian Family Support Services of Austin, focusing on traditional narratives from Hindu mythology through Bharata
Bharatanatyam.
Bharatanatyam dance, spoken word, multimedia, musical soundtrack, etc. A interdisciplinary performance series. I scored this application quite well. I think that they address the mission and the history well, and throughout the application, actually. The note that I made to myself is I think that I would have scored it higher, but feel that some sections of the application might not fit well with city funding sources and the way the application's laid out, just because of the business structure. But in terms of representing community and a track record, I think this applicant began this work like in 1989. So there's a firm track record, a history of collaboration, and a targeted constituency that is targeted, but she seems to be wanting to make that target broader and more inclusive. And another application that represents a community that is not as visible in Austin in terms of their cultural production as other arts projects. So I scored it well.
Yes, so Harold, thank you. I agree that it's serving a community that is not as visible, so it scored well, and for that reason, for me as well. I was impressed, with the community voice section where they discuss the ways in which the community is involved in multiple stages of the process. And my main issue with this application was accessibility. It wasn't clear that there was going to be a formal way to address ability services for people with disabilities. I think, and then my comment on a lot of these that seem to have opportunities created in terms of jobs, just again, how can we have an idea of how many jobs this is creating when you mention jobs? That's all.
And I did want to mention one more thing. In terms of the budgeting, part of what I said was, I think sometimes this application format might be challenging for individual artists or people that are operating as for-profit businesses. And I found that in the budget attachment, in the budget section, it's one of those things where maybe they ran out of time, because that happens at the end of an application when you're meeting a deadline. Or maybe just the format of how those of us in the nonprofit world are accustomed to presenting balanced budgets. Maybe that is foreign to some of the applications that we have received, and maybe there needs to be some training on that aspect.
I just want to provide a point of clarification. Historically, in our previous budgets, in our funding programs, we did require that the applicant have a balanced budget. That was a requirement. However, in this iteration of the Elevate Grant program, there was not a requirement that an applicant provide a balanced budget. So that's just something to consider, just as a point of clarification.
Thank you. Any additional comments, questions on this
do.
application? Yes, Sarah?
Yes, So one question that I had for the application was how much of the queer community, or in this case, non-binary community, is involved in the creative process, but also in the execution of the dance in itself. And I wasn't sure if the director has any experience within the queer community, because definitely this is targeted for the queer community and specifically thinking about beyond the binary, right? So I had the opportunity actually to see one iteration of this work over the pandemic. I don't know them, but like I saw the work. And I kept wanting to see the queer community portrayed. So it's still, I felt like it was like the formal dance, and the concept is really, I was so excited to go see, but at the end, I didn't feel like the queer community was necessarily involved. If it is, it would be great to put that clearly on the application, because otherwise it creates this disconnect that I felt that time. And when I read the application, I kept wanting to know how is the queer community involved in this specific project that is about the binary of the gender, right?
Thank you. Any additional comments, questions? Okay, if not, Anne Marie.
Okay, up next is the Texas Burlesque Festival. Harold, you will be primary, and Melinda is secondary. Harold, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
This application is for the Texas Burlesque Festival 2024. They are requesting $25,000. The program is a 4-day event in the spring, 3 nights of performances. Mentions for the last 3 years, this has taken place at the Long Center in the Rawlins Theater. In addition to the live performances, there would be workshops, speaking events that are open to the public, not just the people who are part of the festival, with the emphasis on educational opportunities and history on the art form of burlesque. The festival would include 12 to 14 performances nightly, with every performer being paid stipend. And then they make a point of mentioning that they would then have a national headliner each night and 1 or 2 regional headliners, and mention that part of the funding would go to support those artist fees, lodging, transportation, etc. I scored this application extremely well. The work has been going on for a long time. The people involved exhibit that they are a connected community. They attract visitors from outside of the city, and they make a point of saying that given the makeup of this organization, the leadership, and its key constituencies, that 51% of the performances are from the queer community. And they go on to detail that they're also inclusive performers affected by all forms of disability, including visual, hearing, mobility impaired, and neuroatypical. I scored this application extremely well because I appreciate the fact that they have this longevity. They have a market in Austin for the work. They are connected to community, and the budgeting made sense to me.
Great. And actually, Siri is going to be secondary on this one.
Yes, I'm opening my comments, but I scored this application well. I think it's really interesting. It has an intersectional approach. It serves marginalized communities at risk. It takes into account accessibility. I was really excited just to read it. I think it's a great proposal, very solid history of service. And definitely it would, and like elevate the diverse arts and cultural sector in the city. And and think overall, I don't have any negative, to be honest. The project, the budget includes payment for participating artists. And so, yeah, I think it's a great application. Mhm.
Thank you. Any additional comments on this applicant? All right, Anne Marie.
All right, next is Ballet Folklorico de Austin. Siri will be the primary and Jake will be the secondary. And Siri, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Yes. Okay, so this is the, pardon my, I don't know if I'm saying this wrong, but it's the Guelahuetza Oaxaqueña 2024. This is an annual performance that brings together families of Mexicanos, Mexico-Americanos, Americanos, and all persons from all around Texas. I'm reading from the application. Guelahuetza Austin started at 2016 with around 1,200 attendees, and the dance company has was a beginner, and then it has kept building on expertise and getting the training and everything. I must say that it was very hard to read the application. We don't care about craft of the writing itself, but just because the answers weren't there, or it was difficult. So I had to like go back and back to see what were the proposal about, who was the key constituency. And so for future reference and the application, the applicant, and I do, as I read it, is someone on behalf of the company or something, but it was very difficult in general to just get the answers or like the content, right? And so I just want to mention that. And within that, I think I couldn't find the specificity of the communities they're serving. And as I read the general, you know, how they say is like someone that appreciates Mexican and Mexican American culture. I don't know the specificity of the community they're serving. And also it's hard to kind of understand if the creative direction and leadership of the project has any lived experience with any of the communities that are at risk. So in general, because I wanted to understand more, I saw the documentation and all, I couldn't find how they have been reaching underserved communities. Again, this might be as to why it is presented. I really tried, but I couldn't find backup on that. And yeah, so those were kind of my notes. I don't see that there is any take on intersectionality, just because as I read it, it seems that the community voices are entered late in the process. And I also couldn't see if there was proof of community non-financial investment. And that was another question I had. Not accessibility and language or any other. I mean, they mentioned that the host is bilingual, but that doesn't mean that they have a specialized adaptation for non-English speaking communities. And so I had a lot of questions, and the budget was also unclear. So it was hard to score this. Yeah.
From a cultural standpoint, I agree with functionally everything. Though I do, if they are to be taken for their word, and this is a continuing tradition worthy of investment, and there's demand from year to year, and that does demonstrate a fairly strong track record of meeting communities, or I don't know about communities, but meeting a particular audience with this material that is interested, hungry for this traditional art, and is having that need be met by a talented group that does seem to be expanding. So I don't necessarily have anything to add to it beyond, in the cultural leadership section, my favorite section, it is signed, by the person who is applying, and it seems that this person is the chair of the City of Austin Arts Commission. I don't know if that is a conflict of interest or not, but that is something that was specified in the application in the section for cultural leadership. And so I don't know necessarily immediately what the rules are on that, but that definitely did stand out to me. And then finally, it does seem that there is a continued outreach to people outside of the Austin community in creating opportunities for artists. There seem to be supplementary performers that are coming in from Los Angeles or Mexico or other places as this will continue. And I just want to make sure that this is continuing to produce opportunities for the artists of Austin, and not just supplementing existing artists without widening that pool of artists within Austin only by attracting artists, outside to supplement.
And just to throw in
They
some,
had past arts commissioner or current. And Marie, do you know? I thought that was that statement was previous, but I don't have that section pulled up right now.
It's in the, just so you know, it's in the end of the cultural leadership section, text section.
okay,
He's
so
former
just-
members.
and which is okay, that's fine. Even if they were a sitting current arts commission member, there are arts commissioners currently who have received cultural funding in the past, even while they were sitting commissioners. So it's not prohibitive for a current or past commissioner to be a recipient of cultural arts funding. If there are any decisions that are made by the Arts Commission relating to cultural funding, they recuse themselves and are not participating in any of the decisions that are related to any award determinations. So it's fine.
I did have
Yes.
a couple of comments. The feeling that I got with this application, and I scored it relatively high, not very high, but there seemed to be the assumption, just in the way it was written, that of course we're addressing equity issues and intersectionality, and we have a targeted cultural community that is our constituency. But it wasn't articulated, it wasn't specified, it wasn't stated that way. But if one has been running an organization, okay, it just seemed to be assumed that we knew that all of those things were in place, so they didn't perhaps address them, which we should be better in our writing. It's actually addressing the questions. So
Thank you. Any additional, I know we're running short on that time for this applicant. If there's not anything else, then Anne Marie.
Okay, next application up for review is Athena Silversmith. Melinda is the primary, Harold is the secondary. Melinda, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
So the project summary for this application is a fashion show of traditional Mexican regional dress and dances, as well as a traditional artisan mercado. Both the Hispanic community, the community at large, and tourists will be invited to the event. There'll be student mariachis for 20 minutes, a short 5-minute welcome from the Mexican consul, and 15 different Mexican states will be represented in the Mexican regional dress presentation. There will also be 15 dances performed by Ballet Folklorico, and then shopping in the Mercado. I love that this is fashion and incorporates fashion, music, and dance. I think that's a great combination. It seems very well planned out already. And manageable with the budget. It's rich in structure and content of the programming. What do I have here too? I like that it has plans to collaborate with the Mexican consulate, and it's already included local dance troupes and mariachis. So a lot of different Latinx serving organizations and groups are collaborating. That was strong for me there. I felt that this one was lacking a little bit in terms of a strong intersectionality statement. It sort of kind of just mentions what intersectionality is, but it doesn't really discuss how it is addressing or approaching this within their programming. And then language accessibility, I wasn't sure if it says there will be a bilingual program in regard to the fashion show, but I wasn't sure if this was a program like on paper, like a program that's given out, or like the list of what's going on, or if it means that there will be translation during the program. So that was unclear to me. But I like this one a lot.
I generally agree, and this is another one where I think some of the responses just assume that, of course, we know that the intersectionality and equity issues are covered and they have a defined constituency. I would have liked to have seen the questions answered more directly in context in 2 or 3 places on the application, rather than just a repeat of the program language from the guidelines. And I found that they did that. I said that I would also like to have a better idea of how their plans and ideas are going to get implemented. And during the course of the application, when they are addressing community support and investment and community partnerships, they talk about a lot of in-kind services and cash donations and sales and all of those things that come together to financially support a program, but then none of those show up in the budget. So I would have liked to have seen them put a value on these valuable in-kind goods and services and how much money they anticipated in cash income. It wasn't addressed at all. I still scored the application relatively high.
Thank you. Anyone else? Not Anne Marie.
All right, we're at our final application for this panel. Sienna Sleeper, Jake is the primary, and Melinda is the secondary. Jake, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Yes, indeed. So Sienna or Sienna is proposing to create a project called Cimarron. Cimarron is the name of a space that they are attempting to get off the ground in East Austin. Within this space, they want to prioritize works and an audience of BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, and disabled artists. They seek to create showcases representing these groups and their arts, as well as workshops, and they propose many other things, which I'll get to shortly. But essentially, I believe from this application, they're applying for basically spatial and organizational support for creating a center in East Austin for that kind of community. They do go out and get quite specific with the they are certainly specific in naming the makeup of their team. I fundamentally do not know if that meets the mandates of our grant. That is just a dilemma that I'm faced with as a reader, so I certainly ask everybody else's input. I'm not immediately sure if that is always automatically a one-to-one, this is our team, therefore this is cultural leadership. And that is something that seems to be a polarity that is created in this application. Moving on to the actual programming, there is a lot of programming that they propose. They're proposing concerts, they're proposing poetry readings, they're proposing vendor markets, they're proposing other things that are also kind of unspecified and saying we'll host certain artists and we'll kind of wait to see what occurs. So that is something that I really I just want to make sure that I actually get to the right place in this application. So I really am specific when I'm saying here. Yes. Sorry, this is important. Yes. So yeah, there's one point though that did cause me alarm with all of the variety of artists that they say that they're representing. A lot of it is may. A lot of that is the language, right? We may include these artists. We may have this. We may have that. That does not seem like it is really firmly planting a flag and saying this is what our programming will be and this is what the money will be going towards. So again, similar to other applications, I understand that a space as a place of cultural leadership may have all kinds of interesting, unpredictable needs and artists that create interesting things that could not be predicted on this application, but enough of it was may or might in this application that it did not make me feel that the programming was really decided in advance, particularly to be asking for the amount that they are for programming specifically. And if it is not going specifically just to these events and it is going to rent or it is going to paying the organizational body or it's going to space improvements, that I think would also really need to be specified as well.
I have these notes for this application. I love the diverse cultural leadership. Each person involved in the cultural leadership has had a strong history of service. Based on that description, I wonder how they come together again in relation to this new project where they're working together. So a little bit of more, again, explanation about how these different people are now, their lived experiences or their roles in are addressed or how they're influencing their approach to the leadership within this project. I was excited that the key constituencies were one of the key constituencies mentioned was disabled artists and the disabled community. And I would wanted to hear a little bit more about how the programming reflected that. And I agree with Jake that part of the issue with this application was that there was a lot of possible things that were going to happen, but it was unclear which ones were already like set and or we're going to be the main focus because it was too much. And I get that the application is for the space where all of these things might happen, but a more concise idea of the most sort of possible like first few things that might happen or that are already happening would have been made this application stronger.
Great, thank you. Any additional comments? All right, Anne Marie.
Okay, well, that concludes our individual creative business panel 3, day 2. So what's next for the applicants? We will be sending out award announcements in early September. Applicants may request written comments and the scores from panelists once awards have been announced. What else? And now if any of the panelists or if our facilitator would like to make any closing remarks, I open the floor.
I have a question about going back in and doing edits to our score.
Sure.
How does that work?
Okay.
I have attempted to go back and I go to the review and score and I get the pop-up and the pop-up is blank.
Right. So what we can do is once we're concluded here, I can do another quick Zoom with you and sort of walk you through that process. But there is a way to edit scores, so you don't have to add additional scores to applications.
Great.
Any other final remarks or thoughts?
I would just like to say thank you to all the applicants. It was a pleasure to read all these applications and the heart and the excitement and the projects. It's really elevating my spirit to be able to see that these things are happening and that we're working towards these projects. So thank you so much for taking the time to write these applications. I really appreciate it.
Agreed.
I want to
Yes.
say one other thing too, which is I think that like a lot of the times when we have kind of been in consensus about scoring highly, we say, oh, it's because there's this really awesome track record, right? And so if anyone is watching this, you know, and they're not receiving it this year, that, you know, continuing to push through may just be that thing, right? That everyone looks at you favorably for. So I think continue, because that is very evident based on the applicants we've received.
Yes, and thank you all for being here. And as panelists, we're so careful and we really, you know, thoughtful of everything. And so I feel grateful also for Patricia and Anne Marie. You hold the space for us, and I feel like held in that. So thank you so
Thank you.
much.
I just want to say thank you to, as everyone has said, to the applicants for putting forth the effort. It is not an easy thing to do, especially if it's not something you do on a regular basis. So kudos, know that you have given yourself a new opportunity just by pursuing this opportunity, and hopefully gain some confidence from it and learn something. Also to the panelists for your hard work in doing this and in honoring the goals of approaching this process with an equity lens and giving space for everyone and all of the unique and diverse projects that were presented. So thank you for that. And thank you for allowing me to be here to help facilitate and serve. Anne Marie.
Well, thank you all. And definitely thank you to all the applicants, and thank you to the panelists. We would not be able to award these funds if it were not for people applying for them, and also people taking the time to really dive in and review these and score them. So thank you all, and thank you so much to Patricia for helping facilitate these conversations. It's been a pleasure, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Long Center Tech Support,
Yes,
who
thank you.
doesn't have a name.
Thank you.
Yes, and Jesus on the other end from the
Yes.
from
Oh, yeah.
economic. There he is, hiding. There he is. Thank you, guys.
Okay. All right.
Bye-bye.
Well, enjoy your afternoons.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.